Drowning deaths in Australian waters are at a 10-year high, and with millions expected to head to waterways to celebrate the new year, Royal Lifesaving is issuing a warning targeted at people visiting rivers and lakes. Joining me now live is Belinda Lawton from Royal Lifesaving Australia. Belinda, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. Why inland waterways like rivers and lakes? Why are they the focus this long weekend in particular?
Look, more than 50% of the drownings that have occurred this year have occurred in inland waterways. We know that in most parts of Australia there's been flooding or other effects from La Nina. So people are going to places that they think they know really well and finding that the riverbank has changed, the sandbanks have moved, and that there's a lot of debris in the water still coming down even months later, and they're getting themselves into trouble. The other major issue, of course, is people getting on the beers before they get in the water. And so we're asking everyone this year, particularly men though, because they are at the higher risk of drowning, to stay off the beers before they get in the water.
Yes, some really good advice. And is the other issue with rivers and lakes is that they seem to look a lot calmer than oceans. So is it the case that people may misinterpret the risks?
Oh, look, absolutely. It can look really still on the surface, and actually you can have very strong currents moving beneath the surface. The other issue is, of course, that inland waterways tend not to be patrolled. So if you do get into trouble, there is no life-saving service there to rescue you. So we'd also encourage people to think about what you've got by way of flotation devices. So esky lids can actually be a fantastic resource in the event of an emergency. So they can, because they float, basically. So you can throw it out to somebody and they can stay afloat for a time while emergency services reach you. We know a lot of people drown trying to rescue others, particularly children. So thinking about those things that you've got around you that you can take with you. So if there is an emergency, you can get help quickly.
Drowning deaths in Australian waters are at a 10-year high. A lot of statistics. What factors are contributing to this rise?
Look, there's a whole range of factors, and obviously the COVID-19 pandemic must be mentioned. It's an important part of it in that a lot of children dropped out of swimming lessons. So we saw a lot of kids no longer getting into the water and doing those regular swimming lessons. And what we're concerned about particularly is that 7 to 12 age group. You know, there's lots of competition. Kids want to get out and play all sorts of different sports, which is terrific. But we need people to make sure that their children can reach the national benchmark before they stop swimming lessons. So the national benchmark is to be able to swim 50 metres and float for 2 minutes. And that doesn't sound like much, but a lot of kids are not reaching that fundamental basic level of being able to look after yourself in the water. So we are asking parents, particularly of older children, to get them back into swimming lessons. And if they have any issues, then if they have any issues with getting a place, then what they should look at is and doing some water safety education online while they're waiting for a place to come up at a local swimming pool.
What would be your advice to parents? Of course, it's the new year, it's the summer holidays, kids are outside, they're in the pool. Have you got any advice for parents?
Yes, look, we would really encourage parents to get in the water with their kids and enjoy being in the water with their kids. For the children under 5, you've got to keep kids within arm's reach at all times. There's a common misconception that it's going to be like in the movies, and if your child gets into trouble, there's going to be lots of noise, lots to see, lots of splashing around. In fact, children drown in as little as 3 centimetres of water and in as little as 20 seconds. So 20 seconds is all it takes. If you're distracted, you pick up a text message, you pick up a phone call, you do any of those fundamental things that you would do, you know, in the course of the day, you get distracted for a moment and your child could drown. So we're asking people particularly to pay close supervision to kids. We know that during this period it's particularly deadly because there's a lot of family and friends gathering, and so often we hear these awful stories where a child has drowned and everybody thought somebody else was watching the kids at the time. So making sure you've got a designated supervisor watching the kids at all times is really important, and making sure that you share that around so that it's not the one person and so they're not getting exhausted and bored after a period of time and losing that focus. It's got to be really active supervision.
Absolutely, and you're right, it doesn't take a long time, so that's really, really good advice. Have you got a message for people to keep safe this summer or some tips to enjoy the water safely?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of other things that people can do. So obviously, the staying off the beers is a really big factor because it is such a high drowning risk. We would ask people, again, close supervision of children. Wearing a life jacket is really important if you're boating or fishing, and making sure that it's a life jacket that fits the current Australian standard. There have been a lot of changes since I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and those old brick life jackets that we all used to wear are no longer the gold standard. There are a lot better life jackets around that give you much more freedom of movement, are much more comfortable to wear, and do keep you safer. They have different harness points, all these things that will keep you safe if you get into trouble in the water. So making sure you've got that life jacket and that meets Australian standards. Not going alone is another one. Making sure that you're going with somebody so that if you do get into trouble, there is someone to raise the alarm. And finally, getting people to get out and get their first aid up to date. CPR is so important and can literally be life-saving. So we'd encourage everyone to brush up on those CPR skills and make sure if you've got a home pool that you have one of those CPR signs up, because in an emergency, particularly if it's an emergency involving someone you love, you can freeze and forget what you need to do, and having that visual cue is hugely important.
It certainly is. And look, fingers crossed for a safe summer for all Australians. Belinda Lawton, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.